The old graveyard stood bathed in the eerie glow of the midnight moon. Twisted trees cast long dancing shadows across the weathered tombstones. A chilly breeze rustled through the leaves, sounding like whispers on the wind. The air hung heavy with the smell of damp earth and forgotten things. It was a night for goosebumps, a night for shivers, a night for ghosts. 5 friends huddled near the rusted iron gates, their breath visible in the cold night air. They were just teenagers, full of bravado and itching for a thrill, the kind of thrill that only a place like this could provide. There was Max, the bold leader, always up for a challenge. His eyes gleamed with a mix of excitement and determination, as if he had something to prove. Next to him stood Jake, the skeptic, trying hard to mask his growing unease. He kept glancing over his shoulder, as if expecting something to jump out from the shadows. Emily, the adventurous one, couldn't hide the sparkle of excitement in her eyes. She had always been drawn to the unknown, and tonight was no different. Quiet Chloe clung to her friend Mia's arm, her face pale in the spectral light. Chloe had never been one for dares, but she didn't want to be left out. They had come to the Whispering Graveyard on a dare, a test of their courage. The legend said that the spirits of the restless dead roamed these grounds, whispering secrets to those brave enough to listen. They were determined to spend a night amongst the graves, to prove they weren't afraid. The challenge was simple: stay until dawn without running away. But as the night grew darker and the wind began to howl, they started to wonder if they had bitten off more than they could chew. The eerie silence was occasionally broken by the rustling of leaves or the distant hoot of an owl, making their hearts race. Each step they took seemed to echo louder than the last, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. The dare had seemed like a fun idea in the safety of daylight, but now, surrounded by the tombstones and the whispers of the past, it felt like a true test of their bravery. Max, ever the leader, proposed a game. "Let's split up," he suggested, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "We'll cover more ground that way. See who can find the oldest grave." The others hesitated, a flicker of doubt in their eyes. But the dare had been issued, and none of them wanted to appear scared. So, with nervous glances over their shoulders, they agreed. They split into different directions, their shadows stretching long and thin behind them. Jake wandered deeper into the graveyard, his heart pounding in his chest. Each step he took seemed to echo in the silence. He ran his hand over the cold, damp surface of a moss-covered tombstone, his fingers tracing the faded inscription. A sudden chill ran down his spine, as if an icy hand had grasped his heart. He spun around, his breath catching in his throat. But there was nothing there, just the shadows dancing in the moonlight. Section 5. Whispers in the Dark. Meanwhile, Emily found herself drawn to a crumbling mausoleum, its stone facade overgrown with ivy. She pushed open the heavy iron door, its hinges groaning in protest. The air inside was thick with the smell of decay. As she stepped inside, she thought she heard a whisper, soft and indistinct. It seemed to come from the far corner, shrouded in darkness. She strained to listen, her heart pounding in her ears. Section 6. Fear Takes Hold. As the friends explored the graveyard, each encountered strange and unsettling occurrences. Chloe swore she saw a figure in white flitting between the trees. Mia felt a cold breath on her neck, even though no one was near. They reconvened at the old oak tree in the center of the graveyard, their faces pale and drawn. Each shared their experiences, their voices hushed with growing fear. The bravado they had felt earlier was gone, replaced by a creeping sense of dread. Section 7. Trapped. They decided to stick together, seeking comfort in numbers. They stumbled upon a small, ancient chapel, its wooden door slightly ajar.
"Let's check it out," Max whispered, his voice trembling slightly.
They cautiously stepped inside, the door creaking ominously behind them. Suddenly, the wind slammed the door shut with a resounding boom. They were plunged into darkness, the sound echoing in the deathly silence that followed. Panic surged through the group. They were trapped. Section 8. The Ghostly Presence. In the dead of night, the graveyard was shrouded in an unsettling silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. The moon cast an eerie glow, illuminating the ancient tombstones and casting long, sinister shadows. Terror gripped their hearts as their eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness. They could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching them, the hairs on the back of their necks standing on end. Every creak and whisper of the wind seemed amplified, sending shivers down their spines. The air grew heavy, making it difficult to breathe. A thick mist began to roll in, enveloping the graveyard in a blanket of fog. The temperature dropped suddenly, and their breath became visible in the cold night air. A cold spot formed in the center of the chapel, and a faint, ethereal glow emanated from the altar. Then, they heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper at first, growing louder and more distinct with each passing moment. A mournful wail, filled with sadness and despair, seemed to come from the very walls of the chapel. It echoed through the empty halls, reverberating off the stone walls and filling the air with a sense of profound sorrow. It circled them, growing louder with every passing second. The sound seemed to come from all directions, making it impossible to pinpoint its source. They felt a chill run down their spines as the wail grew more intense, almost as if the very air around them was vibrating with the sound. Some unseen force pressed down on them, threatening to crush them with its despair. The weight of the presence was almost unbearable, as if the very essence of the chapel was trying to consume them. They struggled to move, their limbs feeling heavy and unresponsive, as the ghostly presence continued to tighten its grip. Section 9. Escape through the night. The night was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and distant howls. Shadows danced under the full moon, casting a ghostly glow over the ancient tombstones. Driven by terror, they scrambled to find an escape. Their hearts pounded in their chests as they darted between the gravestones, the cold air biting at their skin. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow a potential threat. Max rattled the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. His hands were trembling, slick with sweat, as he tried to force the door open. The ancient wood creaked but held firm, refusing to give way. The old wood felt ice cold to the touch. It was as if the door itself was alive, resisting their attempts to escape. The chill seeped into his bones, making him shiver. Desperation lent them strength, and they pushed against the door with all their might. Their combined efforts made the door groan under the pressure, but it still wouldn't open. The sense of urgency grew with each passing second, but it was no use. The door wouldn't open. Frustration etched on their faces. They exchanged desperate glances, knowing they had to find another way out before it was too late. Then, Mia spotted a small window behind the altar. Her eyes widened with hope as she pointed it out to the others. It was a tight fit, but it was their only chance. It was their only chance. The moonlight streaming through the narrow opening seemed to beckon them, offering a glimmer of hope in the darkness. Heaving and pushing, they managed to squeeze through the narrow opening one by one into the cool night air. The fresh air filled their lungs, and for a moment they felt a sense of relief. But the night was far from over, and the dangers still lurked in the shadows. Section 10. Dawn's uncertain light. They didn't stop running until they were far away from the graveyard gates. As dawn broke, casting a pale light on the scene, they finally slowed to a stop, their chests heaving, their bodies trembling. They looked back at the graveyard, its silhouette stark against the emerging light. It looked different now, almost peaceful in the morning calm. But the memory of the night, the terror they had experienced, lingered like a bad taste in their mouths. Section 11. The lingering memory. They never spoke of what happened that night, but the experience changed them. They carried the memory of the whispering graveyard, the chilling feeling of unseen eyes watching them, the bone-rattling fear deep within their hearts. Max was no longer so quick to issue dares. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed them home. Emily's adventures no longer held the same appeal. Chloe and Mia found solace in each other's company, their shared terror forging a bond stronger than ever. Section 12. A final thought. The whispering graveyard remained, a silent sentinel overlooking the town. And though the day belonged to the living, everyone knew that when the sun dipped below the horizon and the moon cast its eerie glow, the graveyard awakened. And the spirits of the night came out to play,